I never thought I would end up in a situation like this, especially not 2 weeks before my wedding. I always imagined this time would feel magical, filled with excitement and calm preparation, but instead my life feels like it is falling apart in slow motion and I am struggling to keep up with everything that is happening around me. When I first got engaged, I felt like everything finally made sense. It felt like all the confusion and loneliness I had experienced before was leading me to a moment of stability and love. I believed I had found someone I could build a future with, someone who would make life feel easier and more complete. I held on to that feeling tightly, thinking it would carry me through everything. But as the wedding day gets closer, reality feels very different from what I imagined. Problems started appearing one after another. First, it was the venue canceling on us unexpectedly, which forced us to find a new place in a hurry. I told myself it was just a small setback and tried not to let it affect me too much. I convinced myself that everything would still come together perfectly in the end. Then the dress issue happened, and that was the first moment I truly felt panic. When it arrived, it was not what I had dreamed of. The details were wrong, the fit was off, and something that was supposed to make me feel beautiful instead made me feel disappointed and anxious. I tried to stay positive, but every time I looked at it, I felt a little more stress building inside me. After that, everything else began to unravel in ways I did not expect. The guest list became complicated, with cancellations and conflicts between families creating tension that I had not anticipated. Instead of bringing people together, the wedding planning seemed to highlight every hidden disagreement and unresolved issue between everyone involved. I started feeling tired all the time. Even when I slept, I woke up with the same heaviness in my mind. I could not stop thinking about what still needed to be done, what might go wrong next, and how quickly time was moving. It felt like I was constantly running but never actually getting anywhere. At the same time, I began noticing changes in my relationship. Small things at first, things I tried to ignore because I did not want to create problems where there were none. But over time, those small changes became harder to dismiss. There was distance where there used to be closeness, silence where there used to be comfort, and a growing sense that something was being left unspoken. I tried to convince myself that it was just stress from the wedding, that we were both overwhelmed and reacting differently to pressure. But the feeling of uncertainty kept growing inside me, even when I tried to push it away. Then came the moment that changed everything. I learned something that made me question not only the relationship but everything I thought I understood about the person I was about to marry. It did not come as a single clear answer, but as a series of signs and realizations that slowly built into something I could no longer ignore. After that, nothing felt the same. The wedding stopped feeling like a celebration and started feeling like a question I did not know how to answer. I found myself thinking less about flowers and decorations and more about whether I was making the right decision at all. Days began to feel heavy and disconnected. I went through routines without really being present in them. I smiled when I needed to, answered questions when asked, and tried to act like everything was still under control, but inside I felt like I was carrying something too heavy to keep holding for much longer. I started questioning my own decisions, wondering if I had ignored things I should have seen earlier or if I had rushed into something because I wanted it to be true so badly. The more I thought about it, the more uncertain I became about everything I had believed in. Even my sense of self began to feel unclear. I no longer felt like the same person who had been so excited about planning a wedding. That version of me felt distant, almost like someone I used to know. The person I am now feels tired, overwhelmed, and unsure of what comes next. As the days continue to pass, I find myself standing in the middle of emotions I do not fully understand. There is sadness, confusion, fear, and a strange quiet hope that maybe clarity will come in time. I do not know what decision I will make about the wedding or about the future, but I know that I cannot keep ignoring how I feel. Right now, everything feels uncertain, and my life feels like a mess I do not know how to fix. But even in the middle of this chaos, I am beginning to understand that I need to slow down and face things honestly, no matter how difficult that might be. The days that followed felt even heavier, as if time itself had slowed down just to make me feel every second of uncertainty more deeply. I kept moving through my routine, but everything felt disconnected, like I was watching my own life from a distance without being fully inside it. People around me continued to talk about the wedding as if it was something joyful and certain, but every mention of it made my chest tighten. I smiled when I had to, nodded when I was expected to, and played the role that everyone around me seemed to need from me, but inside I was constantly questioning everything. Sleep became irregular. Some nights I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, memories, and small details I had previously ignored. Other nights I would fall asleep out of exhaustion only to wake up with the same weight sitting on my mind. It felt like there was no real escape from my thoughts. The relationship that once felt like a safe place now felt uncertain and fragile. There were moments when everything seemed almost normal, brief interactions that reminded me of how things used to be, but those moments never lasted long enough to bring real comfort. They only made the contrast more painful. I started noticing how silence had become more common between us. Not just spoken silence, but emotional silence, the kind where things are clearly felt but never expressed. It made every interaction feel more careful, more distant, and more fragile than before. At the same time, I felt pressure from every direction. Family expectations, social pressure, financial stress, and emotional confusion all seemed to collide at once. Everyone around me seemed focused on making the wedding happen, while I was quietly struggling with whether it should happen at all. I began to withdraw in small ways. I spent more time alone, avoided long conversations, and found excuses to delay decisions that needed to be made. I told myself I just needed time to think, but deep down I was afraid of what I might decide if I thought too much. There were moments when I tried to imagine the wedding day again, trying to force myself to feel the excitement I once had. But every time I did, the image felt unclear and distant, as if it belonged to someone else's life rather than mine. Instead of happiness, I felt pressure and confusion. I also started reflecting on how quickly everything had escalated. How something that once felt simple and certain had slowly turned into something complicated and emotionally heavy. I wondered if I had missed signs along the way or ignored my own instincts because I wanted things to work out so badly. The hardest part was not knowing what the truth actually was anymore. My thoughts kept shifting between hope and doubt, between wanting to believe everything could still be fixed and fearing that something fundamental had already changed. I realized that I was standing at a point in my life where every direction felt uncertain. Staying felt heavy. Leaving felt terrifying. Talking felt complicated. Silence felt unsafe. There was no option that felt easy or clear. Even so, somewhere inside me, a small voice began to grow louder. It was not telling me what decision to make, but it was telling me that I could not continue ignoring my own feelings just to keep things smooth for everyone else. It was the first time in a long time that I felt even slightly connected to myself again. I started thinking less about what others expected and more about what I was actually feeling. It was uncomfortable, even painful at times, but it also felt necessary. Like I had reached a point where avoiding the truth was no longer possible. As the wedding date continued to approach, I knew that something would have to change. Not necessarily everything, not immediately, but something inside me could no longer stay the same. I could feel that clearly, even if I still did not know what the outcome would be. And so I remained there, in the middle of uncertainty, trying to breathe through the chaos, slowly realizing that whatever happened next, I could not lose myself in the process. The closer the wedding date came, the more everything around me started to feel unreal. Like I was trapped inside a life that was moving forward too fast while I was still trying to understand where I stood in it. Each morning I woke up with the same heaviness, and each night I went to bed with the same unanswered questions sitting quietly in my mind. I began to notice how even simple things felt different. Music that used to make me happy now felt distant. Conversations that used to feel natural now felt like I was carefully choosing every word. Even familiar places started to feel unfamiliar, as if my perception of everything had quietly shifted. I tried to focus on practical preparations, hoping that keeping busy would quiet my thoughts. I looked at lists, appointments, and small details that still needed attention. But no matter how much I tried to organize the outside world, the inside of me remained chaotic and unsettled. There were moments when I almost convinced myself that everything would still work out. Moments when I thought maybe I was just overwhelmed and overthinking everything. But those moments never lasted long enough to bring real peace. Doubt always returned, quieter but stronger each time. I found myself observing everything more closely. The way people spoke to me, the way situations unfolded, the way emotions were expressed or avoided. It felt like I was suddenly aware of layers I had never noticed before, layers that made everything feel more complicated than I had once believed. The relationship at the center of all this uncertainty felt like it was suspended in a fragile space. Not broken, not fixed, just unstable. There were attempts at normality, moments of connection that briefly reminded me of what I once felt, but they were often followed by silence or emotional distance that I could no longer ignore. I started to understand that the real struggle was not just about the wedding itself, but about everything it represented. Commitment, trust, future, identity, and the fear of making a permanent decision while feeling so uncertain inside. That realization made everything feel heavier, but also clearer in a strange way. It forced me to stop pretending that the situation was only about stress or timing. Something deeper was being revealed, something I could no longer dismiss. I began spending more time alone again, not out of avoidance this time, but out of necessity. In silence, I could hear my own thoughts more clearly, even if they were uncomfortable. I started asking myself questions I had avoided before, not to find immediate answers, but to understand my own truth more honestly. There was fear in that process. Fear of change, fear of loss, fear of making the wrong decision. But alongside that fear, there was also a growing awareness that ignoring everything would not make it disappear. It would only delay a decision that would eventually have to be faced. As days passed, I stopped trying to force certainty. I stopped trying to convince myself that I had to feel a specific way just because the wedding date was approaching. Instead, I allowed myself to simply exist in the uncertainty without rushing to fix it. And in that space, something subtle began to change. Not in the situation itself, but in me. I started to feel less like I was being carried by events and more like I was slowly beginning to observe them from a clearer place. It was not resolution, but it was awareness. I still did not know what would happen next. I still did not know what decision I would make or what direction my life would take. But for the first time in a while, I understood something important. I could not continue moving forward blindly just to reach an outcome that might not be right for me. Whatever came next, I knew I would have to face it with honesty, even if that honesty changed everything I thought I was building. The final stretch before the wedding felt like standing at the edge of something enormous, unable to see what was on the other side but fully aware that a step was about to be taken. Everything around me continued to move forward as if the path was already decided, but inside I still felt suspended between certainty and doubt. People began speaking to me with more excitement, more expectation. As if the final pieces of a beautiful story were finally coming together, I responded with the same practiced calm, but every word felt heavier than it should have. I could feel myself splitting between the version of me everyone expected and the version of me that was still searching for clarity. I tried once more to connect with the feeling I was supposed to have. I looked at preparations, imagined the ceremony, replayed the idea of walking into a future that was already planned. But instead of comfort, I felt pressure building again, a quiet internal resistance that I could no longer ignore. It became clear that this was no longer just about nerves or temporary confusion. Something deeper inside me was refusing to settle, refusing to accept certainty where I did not feel it. And the more I tried to push it away, the stronger it seemed to become. There were moments when I thought about the possibility of continuing anyway, of going through with everything, and hoping that clarity would come later. But even that thought felt uncertain, as if I was trying to convince myself of something I did not fully believe. I started to understand that uncertainty itself was information. It was not just fear or stress. It was a signal that something important needed attention before any final step was taken. And ignoring it would not make it disappear, only delay what was already unfolding inside me. In the quiet moments, I reflected on everything that had led me here. Not just the recent events, but the accumulation of small feelings, overlooked doubts, and silent questions that had existed long before I admitted them to myself. I realized how easy it had been to focus on the idea of a future rather than fully examine the reality of the present. As the days narrowed down, I felt a shift in perspective. The urgency that once pushed me towards simply completing the wedding began to fade, replaced by a slower, more honest awareness that I needed to understand what I truly felt before committing to something irreversible. It was not a dramatic realization, but a gradual one. A quiet understanding that clarity could not be forced by deadlines or expectations. It had to come from within, even if it arrived late, even if it changed everything. I still did not have all the answers. I still did not know exactly what I would do when the day arrived. But I no longer felt completely carried by the expectations of others. I felt, at least partially, like I was beginning to reclaim my own inner voice. And in that fragile space between fear and awareness, I understood something important. Whatever decision came next, it needed to come from truth, not pressure. From honesty, not urgency. From who I really was, not who I was expected to be. As the wedding week finally arrived, everything outside me became louder, while everything inside me became strangely quiet. It was as if my mind had reached a point where it could no longer process more noise, more pressure, more expectations. Instead, it turned inward, forcing me to sit with everything I had been avoiding. Every detail now felt final. The timeline was no longer flexible, conversations were no longer casual, and every decision felt like it carried irreversible weight. I moved through each day like I was walking through something already written, something I was expected to simply complete. But emotionally, I was no longer fully inside that script. I noticed that I was observing more than participating. Watching reactions instead of feeling them fully. Listening to conversations without fully absorbing them. Smiling at the right moments while my inner world remained distant and heavy. The idea of the wedding was still present everywhere, but it no longer felt like something I was naturally moving toward. It felt more like something I was approaching out of momentum rather than certainty. In the quiet moments, when no one was around, I felt the truth more clearly than ever before. It was not loud or dramatic, but steady and unavoidable. I was not fully aligned with the path I was about to step onto. And the closer it got, the more impossible it became to ignore that feeling. I thought about how much effort had gone into reaching this point. The planning, the conversations, the expectations, the emotional investment from everyone around me. I felt the weight of all of it pressing inward, making the idea of stopping feel almost unthinkable. But at the same time, continuing without honesty felt even heavier. I began to understand that this was not just about one decision anymore. It was about whether I could live with myself afterward, whether I could accept a choice made out of pressure instead of truth, whether the first could ignore my own awareness just to maintain the appearance of something that was supposed to be right. The more I reflected, the more I realized that fear was present in every direction. Fear of continuing, fear of stopping, fear of disappointing people, fear of regret. But beneath all of that fear, there was a smaller but clearer feeling that refused to disappear. A need for truth before permanence. I stopped trying to predict outcomes. I stopped trying to imagine every possible consequence. Instead, I focused on what I actually knew in the present moment. And what I knew was that I could not fully step forward while feeling divided inside. That realization did not bring peace, but it brought clarity. And clarity, even when painful, felt more honest than pretending everything was fine. As the final days narrowed even further, I understood that something would have to be faced directly. Not tomorrow, not someday, but in the immediate reality I was living in. Avoiding it was no longer an option that felt sustainable. I did not know yet what form the final decision would take, or how it would unfold, but I could feel that I was approaching a point where silence would no longer be enough. And for the first time, instead of only feeling fear, I also felt a quiet sense of responsibility toward myself. A recognition that whatever happened next, I needed to be honest about what I felt, even if that honesty changed everything around me.